Good afternoon, folks. Freddie Vasquez, Basement Politics Unfiltered, coming to you for a quick live update on the meeting that happened yesterday between the police and the Cj Hackett family, as well as some interesting stuff that I just found out. Maybe you can help me out with this.
Freddie wins.
You're watching Basement Politics with my dad, Freddie Vasquez.
Good afternoon, folks. Good afternoon, folks. I'm Freddie Vasquez here. Yesterday, the Cj Hackett family, the parents, dad and mom of Cj Hackett, both went to a meeting that they had with the police commissioner, Christopher Sapienza. The meeting was rather short, and they didn't get much information. They went in there hoping they can get some answers. They had some specific questions, but unfortunately, the goal of the meeting, it seems, was to talk about the podcast. They went in there and they were met by Christopher Sapienza, the police commissioner, as well as a police chief who actually was the one that did all the talking. They said they were going to record it as well as have a transcript that would be available in the event that they wanted. And so they recorded this meeting, and the first question was from the police chief or comment was that the podcasts are not helping and they are actually dragging the police department through the mud. So the primary focus was the fact that the podcast was putting out this information in regards to the investigation. Now, we're not putting the police department, we're not dragging the entire Yonkers police department through the mud. That's one thing I want to make very clear. We're not blaming, and the family's not blaming an entire police department. The family's simply asking for answers. They're not, at this point, they can't blame anyone other than Stephen Dolan, who was the individual that we all know was driving the vehicle. But in terms of the potential for a cover-up, or maybe some assistance that Stephen may have received that night, they don't know who to blame, and they're not saying that the entire police department is responsible for this or responsible for some cover-up. Again, they're simply looking for answers to questions they have, like, do you have any footage? Why were you not able to get footage immediately that night? There are many cameras. Well, the answer to that question was they didn't know which direction Stephen took off. Well, you look at all the cameras around there, or you can simply ask the other 16-year-old boy who was there, who witnessed the entire thing. Which direction did he go? And so these answers to the important questions that they have only lead to more suspicion rather than resolve any, questions or resolve any unanswered, questions. Again, any misunderstandings, possibly any, concerns, things that people have been saying to them. They just want answers. They want clarity. And if there's video out there showing Stephen Dolan that night driving, clear as day, his license plate clear as day, why did the police not have this video or some other footage showing the vehicle and exactly what happened that night? There were plenty of cameras there. And so, again, questions that they have when they're answered in that manner, of course, they're going to be more suspicious. Of course, they're going to, be upset. Of course, they're going to want to, go public and say, hey, this is not okay. What do you expect? And so, again, it's not to blame the entire police department. That's not what's happening here. But there are certain individuals that are responsible for providing these answers, and they're holding them accountable to do so. That's the brass, right? And, when I speak with Anthony DiMaggio and we talk about the way the police department was back in the day, the 90s, and it's not like that anymore, you have to remember a lot of the guys that were on the street back then when this, was bad, if they haven't retired, many of them are still up up, in the brass. They're the bosses now. So, we have to think about that and the type of individuals that some of them are, not all. And it's not an entire police department. Again, it's just those that are involved in the specific case, those that are investigating, that have connections to Stephen Dolan. Questions that they have are being answered in a manner which just produces more questions, which just, gives the feeling that they're lying or hiding something. And they're concerned about the podcast and what's being said about the podcast and what's being said about them in this investigation is, that being their only concern, it seems, further upsets the parents who have lost their child, 16-year-old boy, a child. And they're concerned about what's being said on a podcast. If you're doing the right thing, you should have nothing to worry about. And so this is just further proof, and I want folks to understand that this is further proof that what we say here in the podcast is true. It's true. And they don't want it to be said. They don't want it to be made public. So this is more reason why we say it. We need to speak out. We need to share the podcast. That's why I do this. And then, the family ended up leaving. They came with an attorney. The attorney stayed behind. And then they went and started saying that the mayor wanted to meet with them, but the family stormed out. The mayor never had any intentions of meeting with them. If he did, he would have met with them already. But he hasn't. And not to bring in other individuals or name any names, I'm just going to say that we've seen in the past the treatment that certain family members, parents have received when they've lost a loved one, a child. The mayors met with them and bent over backwards for them, right? But why is it that this specific family is getting the cold shoulder? They're being largely ignored by the administration. Chris Sapienza, the police commissioner, couldn't even talk. He had a chief do all the talking, right? Plausible deniability. Pulls himself out the equation. That's not okay. And, I don't know what you guys think about that, right? They didn't really want to stay there long. They saw where it was going. It was just all about the podcast, what's being said. So I just want to say that we support the police. We appreciate what all the police officers out there are doing, especially those that are doing their jobs, doing the right thing, protecting this community, keeping us safe. Thank you. We appreciate you. And we highly respect the Yonkers Police Department. So we want to make sure that that's put out there and that's known. Spread that message because that's the true message that we have here in Basement Politics. Now, are there individuals within the police department and other departments that, are not so good, not so nice, probably shouldn't be there, probably should be fired, probably should have been resign when we want them to go, right? Yeah, of course. Of course. But that doesn't reflect the entire police department, right? So we want to make that very clear. I want to show you really quick, as I was doing some research into this property stuff. Can anyone help me understand this? This property here, I'm on this website here, opengovny.com. Now, I looked up 220 Palisade, and that's the tall building right there as you come off the Sawmill River Parkway. If you're heading downtown, it'll be on your left. If you're leaving the downtown area and you're about to go on the Sawmill, it'll be on your right, that tall building. I looked up some information here, just some general public stuff. This is you call a soft search, I guess. It's not from a paid site that we use. But it says the property owner is the YIDA. And so that's the Yonkers Industrial Development Agency. But here's what it says about the mailing address, which confused me. 177 High Street, Portland, Maine. Can someone, and again, I don't know what that could be. It could be something very innocent. But why would the YIDA have its mailing address in Portland, Maine? They own 220. That's the Yonkers Industrial Development Agency. I spoke about them last night. The mayor is the chairman of that agency. His sister-in-law, Jamie McGill Spano, is the executive director. James Kavanaugh is the president, the husband of Wilson Kimball, the chair of the Zoning Board of Appeal. The two of them were investigated by the New York State Inspector General back in their Battery Park City Authority days before coming here. And so again, I tried to break down that whole triangle, right, of individuals from the YIDA, the zoning board, to the administration and Empire Strategic Planning. So the YIDA, which gives out tax breaks to developers, also buys the property from the city. They're like the middleman. Owns 220 Yonkers Avenue, according to this website, and the mailing address is at 177 High Street in Portland, Maine. Now, I haven't done too much digging. This is why I came on a little later than I wanted to, because I was trying to get some more information, but I will be continue to dig. And so another property that's owned, owner information, 220 YIDA, 177 High Street, mailing address, properties with the same owner, okay? Location, 80 Knowles Street. Let's take a look at that. 80 Knowles Street here in Yonkers. Owner, YIDA. Mailing address, 130 Fernbrook. Now, 130 Fernbrook is the property that's located directly across the street from the bus depot that's going to be removed in order for a park to be built there, which I hear will be named Leonard Spano Park. The property across the street that I'm referring to is owned by the Spanos. So why is 80 Knowles Street, which it says it's owned by the YIDA, the Yonkers Industrial Development Agency, has its mailing address to a Spano property? A property that they really didn't want people to know they had, because it was in the proposed rezoning area, right, of that TOD development stuff they're doing there with Ginsberg, developers who hire Empire Strategic Planning, Nick Spano's lobbying firm. This was something that they were truly concerned about. I remember when Mike Cater's lawsuit came out, which he discusses this, because he says, and I've been saying this, why is it that the taxpayers are going to be paying for this study? The people that stand to benefit are the developers and the Spanos. Why have they not made that public? And so Vinny Spano called me up that night once that lawsuit came out, and he was like, yeah, I got to talk to you. He seemed a bit concerned about that. He goes, you know, we had that property forever, and it's actually not in the study area. But the reality is, whether it's directly in the study area or not, which that's up for debate, you're still going to benefit from that study. And the development's going up there, a property that the Spano owned, Spano family, which is 130 Fernbrook, directly next to a property owned by Joe Cotter, the guy buying up all of Woodworth and Woburn and putting up the movie studios. So why is it that they have a property, 80 Knowles Street, that's listed as owned by the Yonkers Industrial Agency, have a mailing address to 130 Fernbrook, property of the mayor? Also owned by the YIDA, says 373 Tuckahoe, which is a vacant area, vacant lot. And that mailing address is to Carlsbad, California. But it's owned by the YIDA. Again, the Yonkers Industrial Development Agency. So I'm not sure what that's about. Why isn't it to 470 Neppahan, where the YIDA is located, in that building owned by CCNA Realty? The Jalaj family, who are big donors, investors, whose son replaced Vincent and Jeffrey Landsman over at the Zoning Board of Appeal, 20-some-year-old kid. That's where the YIDA office is located. That's where I met with Jamie McGill once. So why isn't that the mailing address, or any address in Yonkers? Why is it that this property that's owned by the YIDA has a California mailing address? Why is it that the other property, the 80 Knowles Street, that's owned by the YIDA, have a mailing address linked to a property owned by Nick Spano and the Spano family? I don't understand. Can anyone tell me that? That's strange, right? 80 Knowles Street connected to a 130 Fernbrook Street, but it's owned by the YIDA. And so this is important information, to understand, connecting dots here. This is rather strange. Maybe someone can help me out. And so in my digging, I came upon this because I traced the address, the main address, the Portland, Maine address, and it led me to a person with the last name Pauling. And I just typed that into the internet, and I came up to this. Dope fix is in at track. Mob link ring had horses drug, feds say. The feds had launched a nationwide investigation into allegation of horse doping and illegal betting at major tracks in New York, Florida, and California. Well, those addresses, Carlsbad is in California, the 144 Main Street, I'm sorry, the 177 Portland, Maine address, 177 High Street, Portland, Maine address that linked me to this Pauling guy is also connected to Florida. Pauling guy is also connected to Florida, but also some connection here in Yonkers. So there we go. We got all 3 states covered there. There's a connection. So how's it connected to Yonkers? Well, let's look at the individual. And Renee Pauling, 54-year-old, a harness driver with a checkered racing career. Pauling was one of 6 drivers suspended in November 1988 by state's Racing and Wagering Board for what is termed lack of effort in racing in a race at Yonkers Raceway that he could have won. He finished 3rd. Pauling blamed defective harness, but he probably was he threw that race, purposely lost. Anyone hear Greg Martin? That name, I've seen it come up. I've seen it places. A member of a well-respected Martin family with a long history of training horses. Martin, 38, is the son of Hall of Fame trainer Frank Pancho Martin and has trained numerous horses at Belmont that have won bettors of fortune. But I've seen that name here in the city of Yonkers. I have to go back because I have so many names, but I definitely know Greg Martin. So Pauling connected here to horse betting in Yonkers, linked to Maine and California and Florida, just like some of these properties here that are owned by the YIDA. California. This one is the only one that's owned by the IDA that's linked to an address in Yonkers is Fernbrook, which is linked to a Spano address. And then you have Portland, Maine, 220 Yonkers Avenue. So I'm going to do some more digging. I'm not sure what all that means. Anyone can tell me, let me know. Very interesting. This is that project that's going up on Alexander Street, 177 million. Yonkers project lands IDA incentives, $177.3 million waterfront project being developed by New York City-based Rose Associates on Alexander Street, which is using all people from Connecticut, by the way. When completed, the development will feature 440 rental apartments in a 7-story building with 443 parking spaces. A total of 10% will be affordable. Right. Yonkers IDA Board of Directors granted the project a $3.8 million in sales tax exemptions and $2 million in mortgage tax recording exemptions. Just in case you were interested in that. This is the property here, 373 Tuckahoe, that's owned by the YIDA, that links to an address in Carlsbad, California. This is the overview of it. Not sure if you're familiar with that area. It's interesting. It's very, very, very interesting. Let's see what else I got here. It's 177 High Street LLC is the company that owns the building of that address. And so I've been doing my research. It's look, I'm looking even in Portland. This is a lot of work. I'm looking all you up, just so you know. Just so you know. Well, anyway, folks, Greg C. Pauling, see, Northport, Florida, 81, but is also connected to Maine, right? Person who lived here, 177 High Street, but it's a commercial building, so you can't live there. So he must have had an address. He must have had an office there. Organizations, Plaza Development, Real Estate, Lakeport Square Housing Associates, Real Estate, And that's Greg Pauling, but he's also, again, connected to Florida. Lakeport Square Housing Associates. So going back to that article, you have that Renee guy, Pauling, and they've been doing these, whatever their crimes that we're doing with the horse racing, New York, Florida, and California. The only state they didn't mention there was Maine, but there's connections to all three of those states, or this at least of the four. But they're talking about Renee Pauling, so he may be a relative of this guy, Gerald Pauling, who's connected to this main address that's listed as the mailing address for 220 Yonkers Avenue, which is owned by the YIDA. And then they also have another property. It's 373, that vacant lot, Tucker Hill Road, that's also owned by the YIDA, that has a Carlsbad address. So is that the California connection there from this article? And then there's 80 Knowles Street, that's owned by the Yonkers Industrial Development Agency, the YIDA. That has a mailing address to 130 Fernbrook Street, a Nick Spano-owned property, Spano family-owned property. Why is that? So I'm making this connection, folks, on Freddie Vasquez. And again, let's support the CJ Hackett family. Justice for CJ. I don't understand why you guys are so concerned with my podcast. Maybe it's because I'm giving this information. Maybe because I'm telling the truth and they don't want it out. I'm Freddie Vasquez. I'm up out of here, folks. Make sure you share. Thank you for watching. Thank you for supporting. And if anybody can help me understand why those properties that are owned by the YIDA have those addresses listed as their mailing addresses, and and if it's something very simple and innocent, let me know and I'll correct myself. But from what I see, it looks a little suspicious, right? Lenny Spano, again, the mailing address for 80 Knowles Street that's owned by the YIDA goes to a Spano property. The YIDA chairman is Mayor Mike Spano. The executive director is Jamie McGill Spano. The president is James Kavanaugh, partners with Nicholas Spano. Have they bought up buildings here in the city of Yonkers making money through companies that they have out of state? So that way we can't make the connections using the YIDA to make these purchases? I don't know. It's very suspicious. What else will we?
You're watching Big Freddie Vasquez. You're watching Basement Politics with my dad, Freddie Vasquez.
Folks, have a beautiful Tuesday. Continue to share the podcast. And check out last night's podcast if you didn't watch it, where we connect the Empire Strategic Planning to developers and the donations they made, as well as the projects that they are representing or building, and showing them going up in front of the zoning board for variances so they can completely change Yonkers. We need to fight this. Some of these changes, if not all, are illegal. Why are they approving all these developments? And Lakeisha Collins-Bellamy, the city council president, who works at the Municipal Housing Authority of the city of Yonkers, whose boss is Wilson Kimball, the chair of the Zoning Board of Appeal, is the one that introduced the legislation to extend the term limits again so that the mayor could run for a fourth time. So was that the plan? Remember, they got rid of Mike Cater. He was going to run for mayor. He wasn't playing their game. And so they went and got Lakeisha, attacked him using the Committee for a Better Yonkers, which was funded by real estate attorneys and developers, because they had an interest in seeing Mike Spano remain in office. And so when Lakeisha got in there after they destroyed Mike Cater, what did she do? She introduced legislation to extend the term limits. If that doesn't sound like a premeditated plan an intentional plan, then I don't know what will ever convince you. But it's obvious that's what's happening here. So now, to the folks that I said on Warburton and all that are being pushed out, remember who are the ones that sold you out. There's a real estate racket going on here. A lot of corruption and nepotism. And the nepotism just supports the corruption. So when they hire people and appoint people to certain positions, we may see it as nepotism, as they doing them a favor, but they're doing themselves a favor, because when they have these people in this position, it strengthens them. It gives them the support that they need. When they have Sam Borelli at the building department, when they have Tom Meyer at the head of DPW, it allows them to do what they want. When they have Wilson Kimball as the head of the zoning board, when they have James Kavanaugh and Jamie McGill Spano running the YIDA, well, really James Kavanaugh running the YIDA along with Nick Spano. That's how this system is supported and continues to operate with impunity. And they also have the council bought and paid for, and they needed the city council president, Keisha Collins-Bellamy, to introduce that legislation. That's all she's done. She's been largely MIA as a city council president. That's what her boss wanted to do. That's what the plan was. Wilson said, we need you because we need this to happen. You have to introduce the legislation. And for that, you will be taken care of, guaranteed. Just wait and see. I'm Freddie Vasquez. Have a beautiful day.
Freddie wins. Fatality. Game over.
No!